The wind tore across the dry plains like a living thing, carrying grit and the faint metallic scent of distant blood. A lone rider hunched over the reins, face streaked with dust, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun burned the earth in cruel streaks of orange and gold. His horse stumbled over a hidden rock, and he grunted, muscles straining, hands blistered, fingers gripping the worn leather saddle, as if letting go would mean falling into oblivion. The ranch lay miles behind him, a mirage of smoke and memories he no longer deserved. She watched from the porch of the half-ruined homestead, the wood creaking under her weight. Her hair, once braided neatly, fell in wild waves across her shoulders, kissed by sun and wind. The papers of her inheritance lay scattered on the floor behind her. Maps, letters, deeds, things that had once meant power, now meaningless. She had screamed, once, when the truth of her barrenness became a sentence she could not escape. No husband, no children, no future but empty acres and the weight of expectation. And yet, standing there, she felt an ache she could not name, a longing that clawed at the hollow in her chest. The cowboy appeared at the edge of the horizon, a shadow moving against fire and dust. His clothes were torn, his hat battered, eyes weary but defiant, carrying the exhaustion of miles, of nights spent under nothing but the stars and the indifferent gaze of coyotes. He dismounted with a quiet grace, a low sigh escaping him as his boots touched the dirt, the world seeming to hold its breath in that moment. She did not move. She could not. There was recognition in her gaze, a flash of anger, a flash of longing, and something else, something deeper, almost unbearable. Her lips parted, but no sound came, and she swallowed hard, tasting the dust of years, of mistakes she hadn't even begun to understand. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, careful. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the wind whistling through broken shutters and dry grasses. His hands were scarred, calloused, evidence of a life too hard, too unforgiving. Yet his eyes, dark, steady, carried a fire that spoke of hope he could not name. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered finally, voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go," he said, low, almost a confession. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not plead. There was only truth in the simplicity of his words. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in like the shadows of unseen predators. She shivered, feeling the chill creep into her bones despite the heat of the day. Memories struck her suddenly. Laughter, betrayal, promises made and broken, nights of loneliness where her body ached for something it would never bear. The land around her, once familiar, now felt alien. A mirror of her inner emptiness. He reached for the door, hesitated, and then gently pushed it open, letting the dry wind follow him in. The smell of old wood, of burnt embers, of cold earth hit him. The room was sparsely furnished, a single chair overturned in the corner, a table scarred by years of use and neglect. She moved closer, hands trembling, reaching instinctively to steady him, even as her heart beat with confusion and fear. "Why are you here?" she asked again, sharper this time. Her voice a mixture of accusation and something more fragile, something that tasted of longing. He looked at her, unflinching, and in his silence, the answer unfolded. He was here because there was nowhere else for him. Yes, but also because the land, broken and barren, reminded him of her, reminded him of the impossibility of love stitched with mistakes. The wind rose suddenly, rattling the windows, tossing her hair across her face. She caught it, pressing it back, and in that moment he saw it, the raw, untamed vulnerability she tried to hide. The same vulnerability he had seen before, in fleeting glances, in letters that had been torn and burned, in nights he had spent wandering her property when she had not known that he stepped closer. Their shadows merged in the flickering light of the setting sun, elongated and trembling across the floorboards. She flinched, not from fear, but from the awareness that the world had shifted, that a choice lay before her she had been too scared to make before. "You can leave," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a plea. "I can," he replied, but there was no movement. No hesitation either. Just the quiet assertion that some things could not be undone, that some truths demanded confrontation. Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the roof, pouring through gaps in the shingles. The wind howled in the trees, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to vanish. They stood together, soaked and shivering, two broken souls suspended in a space where time no longer mattered, where past wounds pressed against the present like ghosts demanding recognition. She closed her eyes and let the rain fall on her face, tasting salt and earth, grief and memory. Somewhere in that storm, she thought she heard a heartbeat, hers his the land's. Something fragile and living, stubborn against the cruelty of circumstance. When she opened her eyes, he was still there, not asking, not demanding, just waiting. And she knew then that the fight, the real fight, had only begun. Not against the land, not against the wind, not even against the past, but against the silence inside her own heart. A crack of lightning lit the room, revealing the lines on their faces, the scars of years spent fighting invisible enemies. And in that brief, electric moment, she screamed, not in anger, not in despair, but in recognition of a truth she could not yet voice. He had broken into her life, and in doing so, had broken something inside her too, something she could never reclaim in the same way again. The storm raged around them. Outside, the plains stretched endless, indifferent. Inside, a fragile ember flickered between them, small but stubborn, promising a fire that might one day burn through the ash. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a memory whispered, love, betrayal, and the price of courage. The morning came gray and wet, the rain leaving the plains slick with mud and streaked with puddles that reflected a sky bruised with clouds. He rode out first, silent, boots sinking into the softened earth, his horse's flanks heaving from the strain of the previous day. She followed at a distance, her skirts heavy with water, hair plastered to her face. The wind had calmed, but the air was thick, smelling of damp earth, wet wood, and the lingering tension of unspoken words. They reached the creek where the water ran high and fast. He lowered the horse's head to drink, muscles rippling beneath tense skin, and she watched him, noticing the fine tremor of fatigue in his hands. He caught her gaze briefly and nodded. A small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that spoke of trust and shared hardship. "Careful," he said quietly, voice carrying over the rushing water. "The bank's slippery." She didn't answer. She only nodded, gripping the reins tighter, forcing her horse to steady itself against the pull of the current. Each step across the muddy edge felt like a choice she had to make. Forward or back, confrontation or retreat. And as she pressed on, she realized that moving forward was not just about the creek. It was about facing the storm inside herself on the far side. The trees formed a corridor of shadows, leaves dripping, and the air smelled of pine and damp decay. There was a silence here that pressed against them, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him, a figure crouched against the tree line, half hidden in shadow, a rifle resting across his knees. He was thin, gaunt, eyes sharp and watchful, and his presence carried an authority she did not want to challenge yet could not ignore. "Who's there?" she called softly, voice almost lost in the sound of wind through branches. "Quiet," the cowboy murmured, placing a hand on her arm, firm but gentle. "Let him speak first." The man stepped forward, revealing a face lined with hardship, a long scar slicing across one cheek, a history written on skin and bone. "I didn't mean no trouble," he said, voice roughened by smoke and wind. "Just passing through." Something in his eyes told them he had fought more than the land could ever demand. He lowered the rifle, slowly, deliberately. The tension in the clearing softened, just a fraction, but not enough to relax. They were all ghosts here, shadows of past wounds moving through a living nightmare. He joined them by the fire later, a small camp he had built beside a fallen log. Sparks floated upward, mingling with the mist, flickering in their eyes. She watched him work, gathering kindling, scraping bark from wet branches, and felt a pang she could not name. The world had given them nothing, yet here they were, carving survival from chaos. "You travel light," she said finally, breaking the silence. Not to mock, but to connect, to measure how much of him was flesh and how much shadow. "Light keeps you alive," he replied, voice steady. "Heavy baggage sinks faster than a body in a creek." She flinched at the metaphor, then laughed softly, bitterly, a sound swallowed by the forest. She wanted to say something more, to explain why she had screamed that night, why her life had broken in ways he could never truly understand. But the words lodged in her throat, unformed, useless against the weight of memory. Night fell thick and fast. Rain returned, pounding the canopy, drumming against leaves, splashing in the puddles on the ground. They huddled close to the fire, warmth stealing the chill from wet bones. The stranger, he had introduced himself as Sam, shared a few sparse details, enough to hint at the life he had lost, the people he had failed, the vengeance he had narrowly avoided. In the flickering firelight, she saw the reflection of her own despair mirrored in his eyes. Two broken souls, bound not by love yet, but by recognition of pain. Hours passed. The fire dwindled. The creek murmured relentlessly. And somewhere in the forest, the quiet sound of movement reminded them that they were never truly alone. Wolves, maybe, or worse. Men who hunted like wolves, seeking reward, revenge, or cruelty with no name. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaf drew their attention, pulling them taut, reminding them that the wilderness was alive and it did not forgive. "You need to rest," he said finally, voice a low rumble. "Tomorrow's worse. Always worse before it gets better." She nodded, though sleep eluded her. She lay beneath a tarp, listening to the storm, counting the moments until the pain of memory drowned in exhaustion. In that quiet, her mind drifted back to the ranch, to the rooms empty of laughter, to the letters she had burned, to the secret she had held so tightly. that her body had refused the life she had been promised, and the man she had loved had left her in silence. Sam's presence was strange comfort. Not warmth, exactly, not security, but a recognition that survival was possible, that scars, though permanent, could be shared, understood. She closed her eyes, feeling the rain soaking through, feeling the ache in her bones, and let herself believe, if only for a moment, that tomorrow might bring something other than loss. She awoke before dawn. The storm softened to a drizzle, the forest muffled in gray light. He was already awake, tending the fire with careful hands, eyes scanning the trees as if anticipating danger from every shadow. She rose quietly, brushing damp hair from her face, and realized that something had shifted between them. Not words, not confessions, but a silent agreement, a tether stronger than trust, born of shared struggle and fragile hope. When the morning came fully, the air crisp and heavy with rain, they left the camp together, moving toward the unknown, toward the land that demanded everything and offered nothing. Every step was measured, cautious. Every glance exchanged was loaded with meaning. The plain stretched endlessly, indifferent, but they walked through it as if defiance itself was a weapon. And then they found it, a grave half covered in dirt and tangled roots, a small wooden marker barely legible. Mary Caldwell, 1872 to 1888. The name stabbed her, a reminder that life could be stolen in a heartbeat, that love and grief were inseparable companions. She knelt, brushing mud from the marker, lips moving in silent prayer for someone she had never known. Sam watched quietly, respect in the tilt of his head, hands resting lightly on the reins of his horse. The world felt heavy then, the weight of choices pressing down on them, and yet something fragile lingered, like the ember of a fire that refused to die. She realized that the journey ahead was not simply survival. It was redemption, understanding, the slow healing of wounds that ran far deeper than flesh. The plains stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. The wind whispered secrets they were not ready to hear. But together, they moved forward, two figures carved from pain, carrying the past like a shadow, walking into the storm with nothing but courage and the faintest hope that some embers, once lit, could ignite a new beginning. The sun had burned itself away by the time they reached the ridge overlooking the canyon. Shadows stretched like dark fingers across the jagged rocks, and the wind whispered of danger and memory alike. Sam dismounted first, boots sinking into loose gravel, eyes scanning the edges for movement. She followed, heart pounding, muscles taut, every sense alert. The plains behind them seemed peaceful from here, but peace was a lie. The land never forgave, and neither did the people who lived by its harsh rules. "They're close," Sam murmured, voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. He adjusted the strap of his rifle, scarred hand steady, but there was tension in the way his jaw clenched. She nodded, gripping her own weapon, though she had little experience beyond aimless practice. It wasn't the mechanics that mattered, it was the resolve, the courage to act when everything inside screamed to run. The first shot came from below, sharp and sudden. Rocks splintered, a horse screamed, and dirt exploded against the canyon wall. Sam dove instinctively, pulling her down behind a boulder. Bodies pressed together as the echoes of violence ricocheted around them. She felt the heat of his presence, the steady heartbeat under her palm, and realized that whatever fear lingered in her chest was tempered by trust forged through storms, mud, and silent confessions. "They'll try to flank us," Sam said, voice taut with warning. "We can't let them surround us." She nodded again, eyes narrowing, mind clearing. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was confrontation with everything that had haunted her life. The rage at the injustice of her body, the loss of love, the cruel expectations of wealth and inheritance, and the betrayal of men who saw her weakness as opportunity. They moved carefully, rock to rock, using the shadows as cover. Bullets tore through the air, some striking the cliff face, sending fragments skittering like falling stars. Sam's aim was precise, economical, every shot a sentence in a story of survival. She followed his lead, finding strength in the rhythm of movement, the careful calculation of life and death, and the strange exhilaration of standing against forces that had seemed insurmountable. That a figure emerged from behind a boulder, gun raised, eyes wild. She fired first, hands trembling but focused. The figure fell, and the canyon echoed with silence broken only by distant wind and dripping water. She felt her stomach twist, not from triumph, but from the horror of what necessity demanded. Life and death were messy, indiscriminate, and she had been pulled into that truth whether she wanted it or not. Sam pulled her behind cover again, hand brushing hers. A fleeting touch, nothing romantic, yet everything. "You're strong," he said simply. "Stronger than you know." She swallowed hard, taste of dust and rain on her tongue, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Strong, but not invincible. She realized then that the choice was not whether to fight, but how to survive without losing herself in the process. The last of their pursuers crested the ridge, hesitation flickering across his face when he saw the pair waiting, calm in the face of chaos. Time seemed to stretch, each second a rope pulling tight, a heartbeat hanging in the air. Then, with a sound like snapping wood, the standoff began in earnest. Shots rang, stones tumbled, and the canyon seemed to shudder under the weight of human determination. She ducked, rolling behind a boulder, heart hammering. She could hear Sam's breathing, even steadying her, grounding her in the storm of adrenaline and fear. And in that moment, she understood the power of choice. To hesitate was death. To act without thought could be death. But to act with intention was survival. When the last echo faded, silence returned. Dust rose from the canyon floor, curling in lazy spirals, settling on blood and stone alike. They emerged, cautious, surveying the aftermath. Not everyone had survived. Not every wound could be healed, but they were alive. And in that survival, there was clarity. The fight had changed them irrevocably. They descended slowly from the ridge, footsteps careful, hearts heavy with the gravity of what had transpired. She glanced at Sam, noticing the faint lines etched deeper by stress, the subtle tremor in his hands. He caught her gaze and gave a small, wry smile. Not triumph, not relief, but acknowledgement. They had endured. They had chosen. They had lived. The plains stretched endlessly before them, bathed now in the pale light of a cautious dawn. She lifted her face to the sky, feeling the wind on wet skin, tasting freedom mixed with sorrow. Somewhere deep inside, a wound had begun to close, not fully healed, never fully, but softened by understanding, by recognition, by the quiet presence of someone who had survived alongside her. They rode together, slow and steady, the canyon fading behind them. No words were necessary. Silence spoke more than dialogue ever could. Every glance, every small gesture, every shared breath told the story of loss, courage, and resilience. As they reached the far edge of the plains, she felt the weight of inheritance, of barrenness, of all she had lost begin to shift. It would not vanish, it never would, but it no longer dictated her path. She could choose for the first time what life would mean. Not wealth, not obligation, not fear, but connection, strength, and survival. Sam slowed his horse, watching her carefully. "Where to now?" he asked softly. She did not answer immediately, letting the wind carry her thoughts. Then, finally she spoke, voice steady and clear. "Forward," she said, "always forward." And they rode on, two figures etched against the rising sun, shadows stretching long across the land that had taken so much, yet still offered a chance at life. The plains whispered promises they had earned through fire, blood, and courage to end the quiet after the storm. She understood something profound. Not every battle could be won. Not every wrong could be made right, but every choice mattered. Even in the darkest valleys, the smallest ember could ignite hope. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, a future existed beyond grief and feared. If this story touched you, if you've ever carried a wound the world couldn't see, then leave a comment below. Let your story be heard. And remember, even in the ashes of loss, something beautiful can rise.